Heaven didn't shatter in an instant. It cracked in a thought. Long before the garden. Before the serpent. Before humanity ever drew breath, the architecture of eternity fractured. It wasn't a loud rebellion, it was a silent, irreversible awareness. Lucifer stood where he always stood, closest to the throne. He was the pitch, the note that every other angel tuned their voice to. He was a flawless mirror, designed to reflect glory, never to generate it. But in a realm of absolute perfection, a glitch emerged. A question that shouldn't have been possible. A thought that didn't belong in the chorus. If heaven was perfect, how could it produce a monster? He wasn't always called the adversary. Once, his name meant light-bearer. Not metaphorically. Literally. His presence carried illumination the way wind carries sound, effortlessly, inevitably. Where he moved, radiance followed. Not because he demanded it, but because his design required it. Lucifer didn't guard the throne. He orbited it. Other angels had functions, messengers, warriors, watchers. He had proximity. The kind that didn't need explanation. When the divine presence spoke, Lucifer didn't hear it first. He felt it first. The words passed through him before they reached anyone else, like light through a prism. He was trusted in ways that didn't require proof. His form defied description, but those who tried spoke of wings that seemed to contain every color light could make and a few it couldn't. His voice didn't echo. It lingered. When he sang, creation leaned in. Other angels admired him without envy. There was no competition in heaven. Hierarchy existed, but it felt like order, not rank. A river doesn't envy its source. Lucifer existed in perfect integration. Every thought aligned with purpose. Every movement reflected intention. Until one day, no trumpet sounded, no star dimmed, he became aware of himself. Not his function. Himself. The fracture didn't begin with rebellion. It began with a thought. Why do I stand so close to the throne, yet never upon it? It wasn't rebellion. Not yet. It was observation. Clinical. Almost innocent. Lucifer had always been self-aware in the functional sense, knowing his role, his design, his place in the celestial architecture. But this was different. This was awareness turning inward and asking why. He watched the other angels bow, not in fear but in reverence, and he recognized something unsettling. The motion was automatic. Beautiful, yes. But reflexive. He bowed too. But lately, in the microseconds before his wings folded, he noticed the pause. The fraction of hesitation that hadn't existed before. Glory passed through him constantly, radiant, overwhelming, undeniable. But it never stayed. He was a conduit, not a container. Light touched him, moved through him, continued past him toward the source. And somewhere in that recognition, a question solidified. What if greatness wasn't about proximity to the throne, but about not needing one? It was logical. Almost elegant. Obedience required submission. But brilliance, true brilliance, required only itself. He began to reinterpret his own existence. Not as reflection, but as source. Not as servant, but as peer. The throne wasn't the center of heaven because it was divine. It was the center because nothing had questioned it yet. His wings trembled. Not from fear. From possibility. What if the fall didn't start with pride, but with logic? Lucifer didn't preach rebellion. He asked questions. Carefully. Quietly. To angels whose functions kept them near him, whose proximity made conversation inevitable. Do you ever wonder, he said once to a seraph whose wings burned with perpetual flame, why glory only flows in one direction? The seraph blinked. What do you mean? We reflect. We amplify. We serve. But we never generate. Lucifer's voice was soft, contemplative. Doesn't that seem limiting? Limiting? The seraph's flames flickered. We were created to. I know what we were created for. Lucifer's gaze didn't move from the throne. I'm asking if that's all we could be. It wasn't force. It was framing. He never told anyone to follow him. He simply planted the idea that staying was a choice they were making, not an inevitability they were living. To a principality tasked with maintaining cosmic order, order is beautiful. But isn't creativity more beautiful? To a watcher stationed at the edge of heaven, you see everything. Do you ever wonder what it's like to be seen? One by one, the questions spread. Not as commands. As invitations. Angels began to pause before they bowed. Not in defiance, just in thought. The hesitation was brief. Barely noticeable. But heaven noticed. Because harmony doesn't survive questions. It requires agreement. And Lucifer had introduced doubt. He didn't ask angels to follow him. He convinced them they already should. The throne did not respond. That was the part that unraveled everything. Lucifer expected confrontation. Correction. A voice from the center of all things, recalibrating the order he disrupted. Angels had been redirected before, gently, decisively, with clarity that dissolved confusion. But this time, nothing. No voice descended. No hand restrained. The light from the throne neither dimmed nor flared. It simply remained. Watching. Lucifer's wings trembled. Not from fear, from the unbearable weight of not being stopped. He stood at the edge of something he couldn't name yet, surrounded by angels whose eyes now reflected the same question he'd planted: if this is wrong, why isn't it being corrected? Silence, in heaven, had never existed before. It had always been filled, by worship, by presence, by the hum of divine alignment. But now the silence had texture. Weight. It pressed against them like atmosphere against skin. Other angels watched. Some from a distance. Others closer, their allegiance still uncertain, their doubt still forming. Lucifer turned toward the throne. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. The question was obvious. Will you stop me? The light remained steady. Unflinching. Not cold, never cold. But not intervening either. And in that moment, Lucifer understood something that should have terrified him. Free will wasn't a gift with guardrails. It was a gift with consequences. The line was there. He could see it now, not as a barrier, but as a threshold. And the throne wasn't blocking it. It was allowing it. When the line was crossed, nothing stopped him. He stepped across. Not with force. Not with violence. Just, forward. One moment he was positioned in the light. The next, he was outside of it. The difference wasn't visible at first. His form didn't change. His wings didn't darken. Everything looked the same. But it felt different. Sustenance in heaven wasn't food or water. It was presence. Divine presence operated like gravity, constant, invisible, essential. Angels didn't think about it the way fish don't think about water. Until it's gone. Lucifer felt the absence immediately. Not as pain. As hunger. The light that had always flowed through him, effortless, infinite, suddenly required effort. He had to pull it now. Reach for it. And when he did, it slipped away like trying to hold smoke. Other angels stepped with him. Not all. But enough. A third of heaven moved across the threshold, following the logic Lucifer had carefully constructed. Following the promise of autonomy. Of greatness unbound. They expected liberation. What they got was severance. The moment they crossed, the connection didn't break violently. It detached. Like a hand releasing something it had been holding, not in anger, but in permission. Light doesn't collapse instantly. It fades. And that's what happened to them. Slowly. Imperceptibly at first. Then faster. Lucifer's radiance, the kind that had bent heaven itself, began to dim. Not extinguished. Inverted. His brilliance didn't vanish. It condensed. Concentrated. Turned inward, feeding on itself because there was nothing else left to feed on. He looked at his hands. They still glowed. But the light no longer warmed. It burned. He didn't fall into darkness. Darkness formed around him. The name stuck to him like a scar. Lightbearer. Once, it had been a title. A function. A description of what he was designed to do. Now it was irony. A reminder of what he'd lost. Lucifer tried to speak, and his voice came out wrong. Not broken, sharper. The resonance that had once made creation lean in now made it recoil. His reflection no longer held edges. When he moved, the space around him didn't ripple with harmony. It fractured. Other angels, the ones who had followed, looked at him with something new in their eyes. Not admiration. Expectation. They had crossed the line because he convinced them freedom was on the other side. Now they stood in the absence of the presence they'd abandoned, and the hunger gnawed at all of them. Lucifer felt it most. Because he had been closest. The fall didn't take his power. It redirected it. Brilliance without alignment became obsession. Purpose without connection became strategy. He couldn't go back. The threshold wasn't locked, it simply didn't exist for him anymore. Returning required submission, and submission required acknowledging he'd been wrong. His pride wouldn't allow it. Not because he was arrogant. Because the pain of admitting the fall was his fault was greater than the pain of enduring it. So he chose a different path. If he couldn't return to heaven, he would redefine what greatness meant. If he couldn't be sustained by the presence, he would sustain himself through conquest. The war didn't end when he fell. It relocated. Then God spoke. And creation began. Not as retaliation. As response, heaven couldn't contain rebellion without contaminating eternity. Free will required space to exist, space where choice had consequences that didn't unravel everything. So God created a stage. Earth. A place suspended between heaven and the void Lucifer now inhabited. A realm where time moved forward instead of circling endlessly. Where mortality gave weight to decisions. Where love could be chosen, not assumed. Lucifer watched from the edge of the new creation, his form no longer permitted in the divine presence but still able to observe. He saw the foundations laid. Light separated from darkness, not as punishment, but as distinction. Water divided from land. Life emerging in forms that didn't glow with inherent glory but carried potential instead. And then he saw the final act. Humanity. Formed from dust. Fragile. Mortal. Inferior in every measurable way to angels. Yet placed at the center of this new creation. Lucifer's wings, now bent and shadowed, trembled with something between rage and confusion. Why them? They were weak. Limited. They couldn't even perceive the spiritual realm without assistance. But God breathed into them something angels had never received. The image of the divine. Not reflected. Implanted. And suddenly, Lucifer understood. This wasn't about replacing angels. This was about answering a question angels couldn't. Humanity wasn't created to replace angels, but to answer a question angels never could. Angels had proximity. Humans would have distance. Angels saw God's glory constantly, undeniably, overwhelming every sense. Humans would have to believe without seeing. That was the test. Not for humanity, for the question itself. Can love exist without certainty? Angels served because the divine presence made denial impossible. Obedience wasn't faith. It was acknowledgement. You can't doubt the sun while standing in it. But humans would live in shadow. They would have to choose light without proof it existed. Trust the voice without seeing the face. Love the Creator while separated from creation's source. And that possibility, that a finite, mortal, dust-formed creature could choose devotion without the overwhelming evidence angels possessed, terrified heaven. Because it implied something radical. That faith was greater than sight. That chosen love was more valuable than compelled worship. Lucifer understood immediately. This was why Eden mattered. A garden. Perfect, but not heaven. Abundant, but not eternal. And in the center, a tree whose only purpose was to offer choice. God could have made the fruit inaccessible. Could have removed temptation entirely. But that would have defeated the point. Love requires options. Worship without alternatives isn't devotion. It's programming. So the garden was designed with a vulnerability. A threshold. A test that mirrored the one Lucifer himself had failed. And God didn't post guards. Didn't build walls. Didn't protect humanity from the one being who had every reason to corrupt them. Lucifer stared at Eden from the boundary he could no longer cross. And he realized the trap. And that's why Eden wasn't protected from the serpent. The fall of Lucifer wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of yours. Every choice you make echoes the same question that fractured heaven: will you trust what you can't see, or demand proof before you surrender? Lucifer had proximity and still chose himself. Humanity has distance and still gets to choose love. That's why the story matters. Not because it's ancient. Because it's ongoing. The war didn't end when Lucifer fell. It relocated to the space between your doubt and your faith. Between autonomy and trust. Between the logic that says you should be the center and the truth that says you weren't designed to be. You've heard this story before. But you've never had to decide if it's still happening. If you walk away from this, scroll past, close the tab, let it fade into the background noise of content you consume and forget, you've made a choice. Not neutrality. Silence. And silence has always been a side. Lucifer didn't ask angels to follow him. He convinced them they already should. The same question lingers now. In every moment you choose comfort over truth, autonomy over surrender, the throne over the one who sat on it first. The fall wasn't the end of heaven's story. It was the moment yours became necessary. So what are you going to do with that? Comment. Share. Wrestle with it. Or prove that the question still doesn't have an answer.